As the NFL's top prospects gather in Indianapolis for the Combine, the search for the leaders of these next generation of great players continues to draw scrutiny. But now, a former NFL veteran says he's developed a performance assessment that helps NFL teams find the best coaching candidate for head coaching positions, regardless of race, creed, or color. Check out my conversation with NFL veteran and two-time All-Pro James Hasty and sociology professor Dr. Cureton from the University of North Carolina Greensboro. Your host, Mark Hayes, for the original podcast for the P&E event 2022, Super Bowl 56. We are in Los Angeles, and I'm joined by a couple of special guests, NFL alum James Hasty. James, what a pleasure to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, indeed. And Dr. Cureton. Doctor, what a pleasure to have you here.
How you doing, man?
All right, first of all, let's talk a little bit about what's happening right now. We can't have this conversation without talking about current events in the NFL.
Right.
The head coaching ranks, obviously, we need more diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the conversation seems to have gotten stale once again. We've taken, two steps back once again. We're down to two head coaches. But you have an idea as to how we can help move the needle. James, describe for us the research that you've done and the science that you put behind the selection of head coaches.
Well, we've created an algorithm that allows us to score coaches based on their contributions on the staff that they work within. And in addition to that, we all know the most important variable is wins and losses. So what roles is that coach taking on in that particular staff? We're able to put a weighted score to that. And then how successful have they been? Unlike any other business, we have something that always separates us from the next, which is the wins and losses. And so we're able to track that coach's career from high school, college to pro, and really decide, hey, how valuable has he been in terms of taking on responsibilities? And if he's taking on those responsibilities, he's going to have a higher score than someone that hasn't done that. And so ultimately, we're using that now to help assess. We built a database of over 1,600 coaches, that's NFL and college. And in addition to that, Dr. Cureton, through his research, has built a qualitative tool, as we call it, that allow that human element to come into play, where how like-minded are you with other folks that are out there that are looking for opportunities within different organizations? And it's been very successful. We've had some conversations with the league, and we're hoping to get something going here sooner or later.
Yeah, Dr. Cureton, tell us a little bit about the human element. What has your research shown when it comes to finding, the right candidate for the right job? Because that's what they'll push back and say, well, maybe not for this job, but he's a good candidate.
Right.
Yeah. Well, again, first of all, qualitative sociology is a way to measure or assess, and in this particular case, conversation. And so when we talk to decision makers and team owners, they know what they want and they converse about what they want. So let's take the word like culture. Culture has about 56 different indicators. A normative way of life, a set of expectations and how owners expect you to do things, lifestyle changes, appearances, the ability to relate, rapport, engagement, all those things. So if a decision maker said, I want someone who is a leader, then we're talking about leadership among men. We're talking about control in the locker room. We're talking about being able to negotiate and navigate the room and understand the different personalities. That's leadership to motivate individuals, to put people in a position to want to perform on the field. So all those things will have a weighted score. And there are some coaches that can go into that with leadership and they can score maybe a 60. And there are other coaches that can go into there and they can score maybe a 90. So what I would then do after the assessment of that conversation, like if we're conversing about what you would see in a coach, you would give me a set of expectations, I would come away with a score and I would say, okay, here's a grade of a 90, here's a grade of an 89, here's a grade of a C. And I would give that to James and he would provide the quantitative assessment. So those two scores can work, say, you know what, we have a quantitative, this is a set of hard facts, wins, losses, positions, here's the humanitarian effort, they have a score with that, and then we can continue to go. It could be leadership, it could be culture of care, it could be a liaison to owners, whatever it is that the owners are saying they want, we sit and say, all right, here's the transparent checklist that you have, and here's the rating, and here's how that coach basically responded in a way that allows us to give them a score. So that's basically what it is. It's just a word audit of conversation.
Right. James, tell me why NFL organizations don't approach hiring the best candidate for a coach the way they assess talent on the field?
I think it's all about relatability. Things that folks may have in common, for example. We saw Brandon Staley get hired by the LA Chargers last year, and in his initial meeting of that organization, he met the family, right? And there was that immediate connection there, right? Well, we're not seeing that oftentimes for black coaches. They're not meeting the families of these organizations right away, right? So there's that relatability issue, that component that we're challenged with. And until we say, hey, we have to separate ourselves from that bias that we all have, then we're going to continue to see this cycle. We have to take the true meritocracy type perspective and really hold strong to it and then enforce it going forward.
Right, right. Doctor, is there value in diversity in the NFL coaching ranks, in the ownership ranks? I mean,
well, let's look at it this way. The NFLPA was started in 1956, Waldorf Astoria, New York. So, and one of the things that was set of expectations that they had, they said, well, we are establishing ourselves as a union to protect the players' health, to protect the social conditions. And so I think when you start thinking about these policy changes, you need to start thinking about who is healthier for this 70% of institution of athletes. So is there an element of genuineness that a minority coach could bring to an athlete to help them to perform? So let's put two coaches even. A coach who's not black versus a coach who is black, all right? And he goes into that room and he's having a conversation with an athlete. And I'm not saying that a white coach cannot be a leader or communicate, but the effectiveness and the efficiency and the genuine of care is going to come from a black coach. That is an elevation. So why wouldn't the owners perceive that? Well, when you're talking about owners and they're thinking about hiring a coach, they're thinking about how that coach fits in with the culture of the institution of the family. What you should be doing is how is that coach going to be able to go into that locker room and talk to those players? And that's the elevation. That's the genuine reality that we need to not be embarrassed about saying. Again, there's sort of this pushback of, all right, the best coach. We believe in the best coach. But when you start talking about the edge to a population of people, you're talking about who has the communication skills and who all these athletes are accustomed to seeing all their lives as they're coming up, and who's being the most effective. You have a story, every athlete has a story of what coach spoke to them and how they spoke to them to push them to a different level, and it's usually associated with a coach who looked like them.
Right, right. James, how is our political climate and our social justice pursuits in America right now affecting the way the NFL does business, the way the NFL, because you got 32 good old boys, sitting in a room, probably saying, you can't tell me who I need to hire for my $1 billion business. I mean, do you think that there is some correlation to what's happening in our political discourse to what's happening in the business of football?
I believe it is. Look, this deal was, for me, George Floyd murder was something that inspired me to really start this process, to really sit down and say, okay, I've heard enough of the owners have to do something, someone has to do something. I mean, I took it upon myself to do something. So, but it came at that critical time where after George Floyd was killed. And so we all have to understand that it's not just up to the owners, right? Mm-hmm. We all have to understand that we can move the needle if we really want to. Right. Now the question is, will guys get involved in this lawsuit and really be engaged in supporting Brian Flores in this action he's now taking?
Right. What is the impact on our young men, on our future NFL players, by not seeing diversity, by hearing this conversation, but not seeing black men being hired in these positions where 70% of the product that's going on the field looks like them?
Well, it makes the use of the word meritocracy a falsehood by saying if you do X, Y, Z, you'll be able to achieve these things. And so what's not happening is that when these coaches are being passed over, there is no common care of concern about what that coach has to go home to and say to his kids over and over again about why it is they didn't get passed over. Now, is it up to the owners to care? I really don't think they do, and it's really not up to the owners to care. But we do have people in positions of power, and they have been gatekeeping so that their positions are not devalued. So let me just say it like this. Brian Flores has engaged in revolutionary suicide. Now, Huey P. Newton wrote a book on revolutionary suicide in 1973, and what that simply means is a person will put their life and their career on the line based on the despair and the social conditions. So therefore, when we talk about Brian Flores and his engaging in revolutionary suicide, he knew that there was such despair that it was going to be a situation where he may have to go at it alone. Every other coach, every other person that's faced similar things has to ask themselves the same thing. If I get involved, will it be suicide, the suicide of my career? Will I have to basically pivot and try to do something else? And just like Jim Trotter wrote an article a couple of days ago, he said, is this Brian Flores complaint a movement or a moment? A moment would just be something like nobody else is supporting him, or will support you behind the scenes, but nobody wants to come forward. A movement is getting, all right, we have 70% of a block of determined athletes who can say and will come forward and say, you know what, I really want to be coached by someone who's black. If we don't care, let's say we don't care. Let's stop being honest and say, hey, we're going to put this on the owners and it's all on them. And we're not absolving them from them duties. But there is another kind of responsibility and accountability that if our athletes, modern day athletes, look at those from the past, like a John Wooten, who is a revolutionary, who has said a lot of things, who have gone out on a limb, or a Muhammad Ali, those kinds of individuals that were out there putting their careers on the line for the betterment and advancement of athletes. This is the moment and the movement in time that we need, and Brian Flores just basically kicked it off. Now, the difference between him and Colin Kaepernick was a statement against what society was doing. It was big, and it was easy for the NFL to get in there because they can do all kinds of community relations and fanfare, glitz and glamour, and everybody thinks everything is okay. Now you're talking about a Brian Flores, and he said, it's about ownership. I've been there, I'm behind the scenes, and this is what's happening in terms of my career. Are you with me or are you not? And so it is the time for either people that's going to stand with him, and if they don't, stop all of that. It's always going to be the same when if you never got out there and tried. Because here is this opportunity where this man is, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. Who's going to stand with him? Bottom line, I don't want to hear anything else about it's always going to be this way. It will always be this way if you don't get involved.
Right. James, so help me understand what the alumni community is saying about this. Because, okay, we could understand a current player may be hesitant to speak out. You know, he's still trying to get his, I get it. But the alumni community, you know, you're off into different pursuits now. You're off into entrepreneurship. You know, you got your car dealership maybe. You're doing okay. Where do they stand? Have you been able to get kind of a feel for the pulse of the alumni community, especially players of color? Extreme support
from the players, because we all know and understand that this lawsuit could effectively take down our league and all our history and legacy. Because when we start talking about the opportunity for Stephen Ross to potentially have defrauded taxpayers, that becomes a huge amount of damages that we're talking about that could essentially take the league down. So when we're talking about all these former players and the legacies that they've built through this league, we can't stand by. And again, that is why I chose to act. Right now, in terms of what Dr. Cureton is speaking on as it relates to gatekeepers at the league office, it has to stop. The league office is just as culpable as those owners are. I've seen a number of articles now where representatives from the league office have spoke obviously against what's gone on. But they've been actively involved in understanding what we're doing, and they've been actively involved in preventing us from having an opportunity to go before the diversity committee. We know if we get before the diversity committee, we have a great chance of getting something instituted within the league.
Right.
But we have gatekeepers, people that look like us, that are preventing us from getting that message out to the league owners.
Right. I mean, is it bad for business at this point?
First of all, let's be honest. I mean, there are two things that can be true at once. And there's two things to be true about league officials who are minorities and those who are engaged with the First Parliament Alliance and even some individuals at the NFLPA. Two things can be true. Puppets and mouthpieces. You got mouthpieces and puppets. Saying one thing, but doing the other. And that's what's happening. And so the idea of an N&J coming in and say we have a solution is not that they don't have knowledge of a solution. It's just that there is an unwillingness to this point of introducing something new. So we have to be very, very careful about that. And so, and to the former athletes, ask yourself, after you have been gladiators for this sport and they have taken care of your family and all these things, and you can barely walk around, you can barely move, how have they treated you in terms of your mental health? How have they treated you in terms of your health? Look at what they did in terms of league and race norming when they basically said your cognitive development started lower than a white man's cognitive development. Think about those things. Think about what the league has said to you after you have finished playing for them, that you're not smart enough, and your health in the deteriorating phase is not on equal par in terms of sums of money that we're going to give to our white athletes. Those are the types of issues that no one is really clamoring about, talking about. And so when you talk about those who are alumni to the sport, and you could just walk around and you can see these once gladiator men in all of their glory, and they're barely able to move up and down the hall. And that's sad, and that makes me angry that that is the case. So the NFL, for all this glitz and glamour, it's just like any other thing. Once they're completed with the product, they push that product to the side and say, next thing new, next person in, next man up. Those are the kinds of issues that we're here to address with respect to that. Again, we're not asking anybody to be a mouthpiece for NJ. We're not asking anybody to sell anybody wolf tickets. Give it a look, and if you don't like it, turn it off. But there's something there, something of value that is transparent, that is worthy, and will right the ship.
Right. Speaking of turning it off, is that the answer to get the NFL to listen? Do fans need to stop watching, stop supporting and spending dollars on stop buying the package?
You know, what I was talking to Dr. Cureton about is the development of this country is tied to the NFL. If you really look at the history of the NFL in the 20th century, the NFL grew with this country. And so this is an important sport to our country, and we all know it. Let's not kid ourselves. Football is not going anywhere.
Right.
It's going to be here for a long, long time. Now the question is, can we get everybody to agree on a system that's fair for everyone? It's not based on race.
Right.
We're saying a system that identifies the best candidate. We don't have self-identification in our database. We don't ask coaches to tell us their race. We don't want to know that. We just want the best coach, just like they want the best player. Right. And we believe we can place a score, just like they place a grade on a player every year. We can place a score on a coach. Now, what else do we have? We have a social networking platform called Huddle Up, which now is in another place. It's like Clubhouse, right? Another forum, a social networking forum where you can go into these virtual rooms and coaches can hear other great coaches talk. Right. And they can learn from other great coaches. This is what the NFL is missing. Right. There's a learning component that a lot of these coaches still need to know about. Right. There's other aspects of the game that they're getting younger by every year, right? We've seen these young coaches being hired. They don't have the experience of running an organization of this level. And it would be huge to have forums and platforms where they can go in and they can learn about this. And this is just another teaching tool that we believe is going to improve the game.
Right.
And to your point again about businesses, now, we all know that when we start talking about integration, there's numerical diversity, there's cultural assimilation, there's all those types of things that are there. So we cannot say, and again, I know mainstream society likes to believe that at some point people will become moral, will grow a heart and make the right decision. How many wrong choices do we need to wait for you to make before you get to the right decision? What happened during the course of that time? Well, America's use of capitalism and dollars started speaking to the fact that these are the things that we need to make happen. So when you start talking about investing in the NFL, when you start talking about changing people's mind, the fan base may not do it, all right, because they love the sport and they don't care who's going to win whatever. What's going to happen is businesses and investors are going to have to start saying this is not right. And it's more about just putting a social justice decal on the helmet. It's about affecting people's welfare in their lives. So as more and more corporations begin to become involved and start talking about their investment dollars, and they're looking at how corporate America looks to them, and they're seeing more diversity, they're going to want the NFL to do the very same thing. So what we also need to do, and I'll be done with for that particular part, what we also need to do is stop calling the NFL a microcosm of society. It's parallel to society. It's mirroring society. It's following it every way, from segregation to integration, all the way to claiming it is a post-racial society in the form of a meritocracy. And we know that's not true. We know that's not true. We know that's not true. You can call it one thing, but we know what it is. And our job as a consulting firm is to make sure that we are speaking truth to power in terms of numerical measures. This is where we are.
Right.
Now, if you so choose to step outside of that, because you are a billionaire and you're an owner, you have a right to do that. But call it what it is. I'm doing what I want to do.
Right. Right. Before I let you guys get out of here, can we talk a little bit about the generational divide here? Because I have kids that are in their 20s, early 30s. I mean, they're different. When I played college football in the 80s, I'm very different than the way my son approached the game. When I but they were raised differently. They were raised on phones and iPads, and at what point do you hire people that can relate to the Black experience and to what Black families are going through and their approach to the game? How do you connect? To me, I like connecting is one of the most important things. You got to be able to communicate in order to connect. And if you don't understand where I came from, how can I trust you?
Right.
With what's going on with me?
Right.
When I get a phone call from home that I've lost a friend or lost an uncle, right, or someone is going to prison, I need somebody to talk to, right? If you can't understand that the Black experience, how can you get the best out of me? Right. So how do we address? I mean, what is the answer there? Is it just because we want to be good and make a lot of money in the league, or is there a way to bridge the gap?
Well, again, just being a professor at the University of North Carolina Greensboro and stepping into these classrooms and for 25 years and teaching generations of young people, I have confidence in them. I have faith in them because they're going back to their parents and said, Dad, that's not right. Mom, that's not right. And some of them are risking the reality of their family saying, well, don't come back home. We're not going to pay your tuition because they're getting a difference in education. And they can go home and say, this is my roommate, this is my friend, and I want them to be happy. And so these people are going to be those who step into these roles who are in the future. On the other hand, when you start talking about the billionaire owners and they keep marrying in and having kids, they're grooming their kids a certain kind of way, so they're already grooming their leadership. But there's going to be an overwhelming majority at some point where these young kids step into the classroom and come out of that classroom fully educated in a diverse environment and say, that's not right, we need to move. So, and I'll give you a case in point. George Floyd didn't carry a lot of steam because it was an all-Black march. It carried a lot of steam because it was a universal march. And we all know that the history of victimization carries value. So when there's Black victimization, there's no value. But when white kids start stepping out there and putting themselves on the front line, i.e. Freedom Summer in 1964, you start getting involved. Like, okay, we got a couple white kids that's missing. Call it what it is. The idea of the value of life is stated or tilted in another way. And so we need those kinds of coalitions, those voices. And I give credit to those generations who are engaging in that and who are stepping up and who are risking parental relationships because it's important to them that their friends are happy. That's where that starts.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. We had a interesting meeting with the NFL in September where we had a chance to explain to them our system, our model, and what we were doing. In that room was several folks, and Roger Goodell was included in that. So when I see him say things like, we don't have a plan, there's no solutions out there, there are solutions. And I need for people to understand that Roger knows there are. And they're fully aware of NJ and what we're about and what tools we have to bring to the table. Now the question is, will they stop hiding and become honest about the facts and the truth? Stop hiding from reality in terms of what people are saying right now. We need to have a new system. This system is one that we believe is a mixed method approach. It's a quantitative database that will be continually growing over the years because we'll be adding more and more coaches to that database. And ultimately, they won't ever be able to say there's no coaches in the pipeline, right? Because we know through a plot graph that we have in our system, we can track up to the minute what coaches are coming up, which coaches are ready to go into that next level. So there's no more excuses when it comes to the NFL and hiding behind the facts.
And this is what Brian Flores' lawsuit called for in terms of elements or ingredients of relief, is that he said there needs to be a transparent way of looking at candidates. There needs to be a side-by-side comparison, i.e. the algorithm that can do that. There needs to be transparency in written notes that folks are taking and making these decisions, i.e. the qualitative measurement tool. All those things that Brian Flores is asking for in terms of his relief package, in terms of what needs to happen, it's already there. Roger Goodell comes up and he says, well, we need to look at how policies are. We need to evaluate our policies, procedures, and look at how those things are affecting or adversely impacting how we make decisions. And again, certainly there can be some policy changes, some procedure changes, but there needs to be personnel changes because there are individuals who may look like us that have been disingenuous in saying one thing, but when they get into positions of power, they're so co-opted in their mind, they adopt the philosophy of those who are in positions of power. So therefore, they're making the very same choices. Policy changes, personnel changes can help impact that. If we came to a solution, one of the solutions that I'm 100% having faith in is there needs to be outside oversight of what the NFL is doing with the power to implement and, if need be, and I'm using the word, punish individuals who are indeed making these decisions that are discriminatory, because those are labor issues, those are health issues, those are mental health issues. This is what the NFLPA said they would do and protect the athletes from. These are the things that are impacting the modern day athlete. You say, well, who would be in a position to provide oversight of these billionaires? Well, where are the billionaires getting their money from? Investors. Right. And now these investors are saying they are about diversity, so somebody has to start anteing up. We say, well, that's too big of a solution. Where can we start? It's N&J. So stop saying you don't have a solution. Here it is, I'm telling you, and I have no qualms with telling you this. These folks, top to bottom, looking like us, are being disingenuous. And they're on the clock.
Wow. Some insightful stuff, gentlemen. I
Yeah.
wish you the best with it.
Appreciate it.
You know, because I think we're better when we're more diverse. I think, and I love the game too much to let it, be soured.
Yeah.
By the
And
disqualification.
let's point out that this is not about the Rooney Rule.
Right.
Okay. Can
Right.
we just?
I mean,
I'm just asking folks at home to stop saying that we need to get rid of the Rooney Rule,
Right.
because we would not be here had that not came into play.
Right.
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 So let's build on what we have, but we have other ways to enhance what we have, and we can be successful because we can do better than what we're doing.
Absolutely.
We can absolutely do better.
Absolutely. Well, I commend you on your hard work and your dedication to the cause, and I appreciate it. And thanks for coming by. For more information on the performance assessment, you can check out their website at najconsult.com. There you see the link at the bottom of your screen. Reporting for the Atlanta Daily World, from Los Angeles,